Good morning. Welcome all of you to our today's webinar, Food Freedom, Understanding and Honoring Our Own Body Wisdom. I'm welcoming all of you on behalf of Sakal Media Group. I would also love to like to tell you that we have a mental health website called as We Are in This Together. It was launched last year in the middle of the pandemic through that we've been doing a lot of mental health work. We have a helpline, 24 hours 7 days a week helpline dedicated for mental health, and we've crossed more than 5,000 calls now. We regularly have webinars to basically empower everyone on what it is, to find that balance in your mental health. So it's all about, even we've had various other holistic approaches as well. We've had people who are musicians. We had Ramdev Baba. We had music therapy, movement therapy, all visual art therapy, all sorts of holistic interventions to basically help us navigate through this crisis mode that we were having since the last entire year. And today is also one such very interesting personality that is here, and I would love to welcome Tara Mahadevan and just explain, tell you all a few things about her. So Mahadevan is a Mumbai-based counseling psychologist who works with clients to help them get more clarity on a variety of life issues, effectively understand and manage their emotions, and live more authentic and enriched lives. Besides general counseling, she also specializes in the area of food and eating psychology. She helps clients adopt a holistic approach to eating, emotions, and well being, not just through diet, but also through mindfulness and self compassion therapy. In her work with clients, Tara incorporates a range of therapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness based interventions, and existential psychotherapy. Wow, that's a lot of therapy that you've learned, and I'm sure you'll explain to us how each can be beneficial in today's webinar. Tara Mahadevan has a postgraduate diploma in existential psychotherapy from Middlesex University and the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling from UK. She also has a master's in psychology from SNDT University, Mumbai, and a bachelor's in psychology from Vassar College, USA. She's also an internationally certified wellness coach and weight counselor from Well Coaches Corporation, US, a certified clinical pediatric obesity counselor from the University of San Francisco, a certified mindful eating facilitator from the Am I Hungry Mindful Eating program, also from the US. So thank you, Tara, for coming in and for giving us your time to interact and share your knowledge on all of these fields. So as we spoke, if you remember, let's just begin with one very basic concept, question that I have for you is, why do we eat?
Okay. So we eat for a lot of reasons. So one, obviously, the main reason we think we eat is because of physical hunger. But there are a lot of other reasons why we eat. We eat because we are stressed. We eat because we are happy. We eat because we are mad. We eat because we are sad. We eat because we are glad. We eat for a range of emotions. We also, it's not just, we eat based on certain cues. So psychologically, we found that, we eat when we see other people eating. We eat when we see food around. We eat because it's time to eat. We eat because, the maid's got to go, so let me quickly eat now. Or, we eat for all these other, a lot of external reasons today. And these are not necessarily wrong or bad, or, it's not like we have to stop eating and only eat when we're hungry. But we really just want to be a little bit aware of what are the different factors and triggers that go into our food, eating, and lifestyle choices.
Exactly. So what you're saying is, more than really listening to our body and whether we are really feeling hungry or not, it's also a lot of these conditioned habitual responses, that are so ingrained now into our system, and which is what makes us eat more than really feeling the hunger in our body.
So there are a lot of what we call different triggers. So triggers is not necessarily a great word, but say different factors. So there'll be physical factors why we eat. And these are reasons why we eat besides hunger. So physical factors why we may eat besides hunger would be thirst, a big common one. Many people are eating when they're actually thirsty. They're not hydrating themselves enough. Fatigue. A lot of times, what we actually are hungry for is a rest or a nap, because we're overworking today. We're overcommitting. We're not sleeping enough, and that is putting the body in a state of constant need for energy. But actually, what it needs is a rest, not really food. So, but it kind of manifests as, let me eat something because I need that quick energy. Also, hormonal fluctuations for women. It's not necessarily that they're hungry. Sometimes they are, but it's also because hormones influence our moods, and then our moods influence our food choices. So those are some of the physical factors why we may eat. Then there are also bulk of environmental factors why we eat. We see food and we want to eat food, and this is actually it is actually linked, and it's a very sort of basic human tendency, because it's linked to our survival. So back in the day when we didn't have food so accessible, and we did live in times of feast and famine, it served to our survival to eat food whenever we saw it. Otherwise we wouldn't survive, and then we would store that food, and then in times of famine, that would see us through. But the thing is, today we're not living in those times. We're living in literally in times of feast and feast. So but that is very so ingrained in our genes that sometimes people, it's very useful to kind of understand that, oh, okay, that's why I eat food whenever I see it, or because it's that instinctive, almost primordial instinct that's coming out and say, okay, this means survival. I better eat now because I don't know when I'm going to get my next meal. But we also, over the years, research has shown, we did develop areas in our brain dedicated to self-control. So as we progressed as societies and learned to settle down in communities, we needed to learn how to share. And so, if there were 20 apples and 50 of us, we need to share, otherwise we'd be excommunicated from the group. So, we do have areas in the brain that are dedicated to self-control, but they came at a much later sort of development in our evolution, but we do have them. So, the environmental factor of seeing food is so potent, though, and it's just really helpful to understand that. And that's where mindfulness can come in. So before you automatically reach for food because it's there, you just take a pause and say, okay, wait, do I really need it or do I want it? So that's one of the environmental factors. But also a lot of environmental factors today, food has become the thing to do. Food has become a way to socialize. Food has become a way to celebrate love. Food has become a way to comfort ourselves, reward ourselves, etc., etc. And like I said, none of these are wrong, but these are many of the environmental factors that kind of influence our food and eating. And then, of course, there are emotional factors that influence our food and eating, both positive and negative. So celebration, love, etc. These are positive emotions that maybe kind of like want to eat more, or we want to celebrate, and then that happens through food. And then there are also emotional factors like uncomfortable emotions, boredom. A lot of people today especially are eating because they're bored. Food has become a way to kind of separate activities as opposed to just take a break without food. And then of course I work with people who have more deeper rooted emotional issues, whether that's depression or anxiety, or navigating a different relationship. And then to soothe and comfort ourselves, we eat food. I do also want to say, the same reasons why we eat food may be the same reasons, especially in the emotional area, why we don't eat food. So for people who have eating disorders or struggle with emotional eating, some of them may be overeating due to emotional reasons, and some people may be not eating or purposely kind of restricting themselves or starving themselves for those very same uncomfortable emotions. So yeah, so there's a range of reasons why we eat.
So this was very interesting, Tara, to know that even when the body is dehydrated, you end up eating, instead of drinking water. And
Yes.
so much of our emotions, as you said, that you socialize with food. Today food is everywhere, right from your Instagram perfect pictures to wanting to have new culinary
Yes.
adventures. Food has really come a very long way. So as you're saying that food is also very deeply connected with our emotional states. Even in boredom we eat, even when we are very excited we end up eating or not eating. Can you talk a little bit more about these emotional states, and what is the trigger that is there towards food? Why do we need to reach out to food? Is it some satiated feeling that we're trying to have, or what is it that are we trying to numb certain emotions?
Yeah, so
um,
it's a combination of things. So number one is food does feel good for the body, right? Like I said, it's linked to our survival. So when we eat, instinctively we're going to activate areas in our brain that make us feel good. And the thing is, when we're eating out of for emotions, we're not necessarily reaching for, say, roti sabji. We're reaching for a pakora or a samosa or a cake or a whatever. And that the reason we do this is because the two primordial tastes our brain is designed to like is fat and sugar. So the sweet taste and the fat taste together, they help us store energy, and the body is designed to store energy, and that's exactly what it's designed to do. And so food in a way is comforting for the body. It does feel good for the body, and so that's one reason why we reach for food. Another reason today is because it's accessible, because it is just really accessible, and because it's easy to do, right? So today, if I'm feeling bored, it's just really easy for me to open the fridge and reach for something, as opposed to make an effort to do something else, right? Even though that's what we kind of want to move towards, and understand that we need to feed our emotional hungers without food as well. But one of the reasons why it's just easy, there's this great author called Michael Pollan, and he's written many books, and he has a few lines that I really like. Is one is, eat food, mostly plants and not too much. But he talks about, you know, the accessibility of food today, and food that's not even real food. So, back in the day, if we wanted potato chips,
hmm,
we would make them fresh, and that took effort. So we're not going to really be eating those every single day. So he says that if you want potato chips, eat them, but just as long as you're willing to make them. So, and how often are you going to be making them, right? So that automatically kind of sets in a moderation, that sets in a kind of balance. Whereas today, if you want potato chips and I want potato chips, we can get a supersized bag for ourselves every day, 4 times a day. So the accessibility of food has also sort of stimulated that habit of reaching for it. And it's also another thing, I personally feel that eating is not as, or overeating is not considered as taboo as, say, smoking or drinking or alcohol, obviously, because these are bad things for you. And you know obviously food is something that we really really need. But also today, because like you said, there's this whole food industry, and we associate this idea of foodie as someone who stuffs themselves, or someone who must be fat, or someone who has to eat more. But the whole essence of mindfulness is that it's not necessarily that we need to eat more to feel more satisfied. We just need to kind of pay attention to what we eat and how we eat and how much we eat, and then less actually becomes more.
absolutely. But then now, don't you think all of this is also tied up with our conditioning, the way
Yes, of course.
brought up? Even for families, you will see, mothers force feeding children, or certain things that you just simply have to eat. So a lot of our food habits really begin in our infanthood. uh,
Yes.
that's when it is. So what are the changes? What is driving, what is this conditioning, the social conditioning? And do you see it differently in Asian countries? Is it different in the Western world? What conditioning, the role conditioning plays in our association, in our relationship with food?
So conditioning has everything really to do with our food choices, our food habits, sometimes even the foods that we like and enjoy, the foods we don't like and enjoy as well. Traditionally in Indian culture, we've seen food and then having sort of a little bit of extra padding on our bodies as something that is necessary. That's something that is linked to even social status. That is linked to even um, yeah, like literally social status, etc. Even in certain African countries, because when originally when you're sort of when you have a lot of poverty, etc., then you don't want to be malnourished. And so this is kind of one way to make sure that you get enough, right? So this concept of getting enough food. But research now shows that kids actually are born, we are all born with the hunger and fullness instinct. Our body has wisdom. It knows when it needs food, and it knows when it doesn't really need that much food. And kids go through phases. There's some phases when they don't really want to eat. Whatever brain changes and development must be that is going on, they need space to think and be creative, etc. And then there are phases when they really can eat a whole bunch of food. And but as we grow up, we want control, we want predictability, we want to make, as parents, our lives easier so that we can get on with our day or whatever. So we hurry up our kids so that they can eat faster, or we tell them that you must eat this, and if they don't want to eat something, then we'll provide 100,000 different options. But actually we shouldn't be doing that. We should be honoring their rhythms and their body, and that's very difficult for parents today, right? So if I'm seeing my child not eat for a few days, it's really, really difficult for me. That's stimulating anxiety in me. But that actually, I need to trust that, obviously you have to be in consultation with a pediatrician and a doctor, and obviously all of this stuff. But most likely, most pediatricians today are also saying honor your child's body wisdom. Don't go according to what you think that child needs. So conditioning is really, really key. And then we spend much of our adult lives trying to unlearn the conditioning that we had in childhood. Like, for instance, with me, my grandmother would just give me too much food. I was a really, really plump child, and it was too much for me. Of course, I loved it because food tastes good. And of course, who wouldn't want chiku milkshake and ice cream and, buns and all of these things all the time? But, we really, really need to question or kind of rethink the conditioning, so that given today that we have a problem of too much food, of too many lifestyle diseases.
True. What you said was also very interesting, that to be able to listen to your own body's wisdom of when you are hungry. But sometimes the conditioning can become so strong for a lot
Yes.
of people that you have lost that connect with yourself to know. It's just become a habit to eat at a certain time, as you said earlier, because you're in a hurry, the maid will go, the work will start, and you want to quickly finish off the chore for the day. And it's no longer that you're eating when you're hungry, because it may interfere with your other things that you have set out for yourself in the day. So
Yes.
one has to teach oneself again to be
Yes, it
able
is a
to listen.
process. It's a
How
process
do
of
do
really learning that. And that's where mindfulness comes in, right? So it also took me a long time. I'm in this field because it's, my journey with food has also been an emotional one. I used to eat for reasons for food, etc. But it's a process of kind of really, really sitting with yourself, really giving yourself time and space to figure that out along the way and navigate that along the way. So it's not like there's this formula. It's not like, which is what diets kind of imply, that follow this diet, so many grams of this, so many grams of that. Now I know there are a lot of nutritionists over here, and so nutrition science has a great role to play. But it's a blueprint, because when you're sitting in front of a client, or you're sitting in front of a person, that person is so unique and so complex that you the nutrition bit can have a blueprint, but their bodies are going to be telling them. So we need to, then it's a process of really reconnecting to that. And for that, to really get answers from our body, we need mindfulness, which is really creating a space, a non-judgmental space of awareness. So just kind of sitting with ourselves and being fully present with ourselves and with our bodies, and checking in on that day, because we're such fluid beings. As human beings, we change, we grow, we evolve. And so, obviously the body works a little bit on a rhythm and a structure, but there's also going to be some variations. So some days you may not be that hungry, some days you will be that hungry, some days that certain, when it's hot we want something more cooling, when it's cold we want something more warm. So it's a process of kind of really rediscovering your own body, body's needs, your body's rhythms, your body's wisdom. And the thing is, when I tell people that that takes time, that somehow is just like, no, 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 I don't have time. I need to know now. Like, give me the formula now. But life doesn't work that way. And that's the hard bit to come to terms with. It's not that figuring this out is really hard. It's allowing ourselves the time and space to do that.
As you said, eating according to seasons, and that's what basically our entire Ayurveda is about. So you eat according to, winter months, rainy season. That also means that you are, training your body also to be able to eat certain foods or even foods that are grown at that time of the year.
Yes.
So
And now we
around,
don't even, that concept of seasonal food is kind of gone, because you get most of the things except maybe for mangoes, chikkus, and sitafals. You get all the fruits all year round, so we don't even know what's seasonal anymore. But that said, of course, we still have a wisdom within our body. We still have a wisdom that we can connect to on a daily basis. And for that, it is really, really important that we show up and be fully present. We're just too distracted today with so many things. We're distracted with our phones, with our computers, with the TV, and all kinds of gadgets. And so when we show up to eat food, we are not even there. We're distracted. And so we cannot form a relationship or cultivate a relationship with our body or get to know our body wisdom if we're distracted. And that is like such a basic point of mindful eating, that you cannot be mindful if your mind is full.
that's such a interesting that you said, you can't be mindful when your mind is full. So when one wants to really, now since we have a lot of students here of, a lot of nutritionists here, what are the guidelines when you say that, practice mindfulness? One of the things that at least is easier to do is keep your cell phones away, not eat
Yes.
in front of the television. But otherwise, what is the other deeper way of really listening to the signals that your body is giving you relating to hunger?
Okay, so
How is it done?
I would say the top 5 ways to sort of kind of begin a mindful eating practice would be: number one, obviously you've got to switch off all your distractions. And you can't say, oh, but it's in the background, or but I just watch it for 5 minutes, or then if I've had all these kind of excuses where, but I just serve myself once and then I'm eating and I don't serve again, but it comes to bite us back later. So we got to switch off all distractions, number one, when we're eating. And the second thing, which many people kind of miss out, is that we want to eat in only one area of the house and never in the bedroom. So ideally, we want to be eating in the dining table, or maximum, you want to pop a grape or something in the kitchen, that's fine. Areas that are associated with food. But when we start taking food into other areas of the house, whether that's the kitchen or whether that's the living room, the bedroom especially, what we are doing is we are associating in the brain food and those activities that are associated with that room. So for instance, the bedroom is supposed to be only associated with sleep, rest, and relaxation. But if I take food into that, then neurologically what's going on in my brain is that eating is also associated with that. Okay, so I tell my clients, I don't even care if you're eating carrot sticks, you will not eat it in the bedroom. We need to break that association. So when we then show up for food where it's only one area of the house, then we can really connect, am I really hungry or not? Because if I'm associating food with all my areas of my house or even my workspace, then the lines between when am I hungry and when am I full become very blurred, because the brain works, it works on automation. So, the one place we don't really associate food with is the bathroom. So, and if I tell people take food into the bathroom, they're like, oh no, that's disgusting, right? So, but why, right? So we need to kind of break that association of food and every activity, every area of the house, and even in a work setting. Suppose, ideally you'd want to be eating in a cafeteria downstairs or whatever. But I tell people, even if you don't have that option, don't eat in the same chair on the same desk. So maybe get a smaller table, separately. If you can't do that, sit on the other side of the table, because you're not associating work from that side of the table. So anything that is going to kind of break that association between every activity and eating. So that's a very big one. Number 3 is when you start eating or before you start eating, check in to see how hungry you are. Check in to see, how much food do I need? What do I need? And how full do I want to feel after? Right. So I don't want to feel heavy, etc. So just kind of getting a sense of where you are at that moment. Because if I've got my lunch dabba and I'm just used to eating it, I've got 2 roti, sabji, salad, dal. But every day I may not need two rotis. Every day, some days I may need 3, some days I may need 1. So just kind of checking in with that becomes really another thing to kind of practice in mindful eating. And then going along with that is we also want to check in with our emotional hungers. What is going on with me emotionally? Am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling bored? Am I feeling tired? Am I feeling lonely? And we need to really, really learn to cultivate non-food snacks. So we need to feed our emotions appropriately without food as well. So if I'm bored, instead of eating, a packet of chips, I will be much more satisfied if I'm going to call a friend and just have a nice chat, or if I'm going to, go for a walk or do something that is not food related. So if for a non-hunger need, food will never satisfy us. It will pass the time, but that emotion will still be there after the food's gone. So we really want to check in with our emotional hungers and feed those accordingly as well on a daily basis. And the fifth one I would say that's really important is to develop a self-compassion practice. So most of us are so critical about ourselves and our bodies that it actually has the opposite effect of what we want. We think being critical is going to motivate us to get to the gym or eat healthy, but it actually has the opposite effect. And self-compassion, or talking to ourselves kindly and kind of gently, creates a safe space within us to then take the behavior changes that we need to. So yeah, these would be the main 5 uh, mindful eating practices to begin, and these are much harder than going on a diet. So when I tell people, I tell my clients, they tell me, just give me a strict diet, and I'm like, I don't do that. I'm going to give you a diet, but it's going to be very different. I'm going to give you a diet of not having your phone and TV on when you're eating. I'm going to give you a diet of only eating at your dining table. I'm going to give you a diet of checking in with your emotional hungers and learning to feed that. And this kind of stuff is much harder because it's unlearning conditioning, as you said.
I think this is very interesting takeaway for all the students as well, because what you're also doing is you're going beyond just prescribing a diet, and that's where I think all your counseling and your therapy comes in, because you're also making people aware of where the emotional gaps are and what
Yes.
needs to be filled, and are they using food to fill that. So it's
Yeah.
also mindfulness, that you have towards yourself, which can later on extend towards food or other activities that you do. I think the other very interesting takeaway is not to be sitting at your desk, but sit on the other side, so you don't associate, and you create a strong boundary between your work and food, between the bedroom and food. Because you're
Yes.
right, most of us have our television sets also in our bedroom, so food comes in and you
And
just.
that's another thing. So that's separate from actually, but it's still linked with food. So ideally, we don't even want the TV in the bedroom, because what that does in a roundabout way is that usually on the TV, we're also seeing food. We're seeing ads for food. And especially we're watching TV late at night just before bed, we're seeing ads for Pepsi, and we're seeing ads for Good Day biscuits, and we're seeing ads for all these. I mean, I'm not saying, I don't think we really see ads for apples, So, and then that visual stimulation of food makes us want to go and eat food. And then what we do is we bring the food back into the bedroom. So it's this sort of, feedback loop that keeps going on.
True. I think when the first step is achieved, or at least one is on the track of being aware of,
Yes.
what your emotional triggers are, then it's easy to then think about, okay, now what does my body need, or if I need to have a weight loss or weight gain, now
Yes.
what should be adding or subtracting from my diet, so that I am living a healthier lifestyle. It's not just about the fad of becoming thin. Coming to that, there are also so many diets that today nutritionists prescribe. There are all these keto diets and low grain, high protein, zero carb. There's so much of things that keep coming in, And people sometimes randomly read from the internet and start following it on themselves. But even as nutritionists, what is it that you really need to know? Because every few weeks something new comes up, something that was already there becomes redundant. So when you prescribe these diets, what is the aim of such zero carb, high protein, high fat in keto? What is it meant to do to really our metabolism, and how should we respond to all of these diet fads that are coming?
So, like you said, these are diet fads. So, it's not going to last very long. And, as nutritionists, we want to, yes, obviously be aware of what's going on. We want to be aware of, what is the latest that is being propagated by the media, first of all. So, for instance, the keto diet was developed for patients with epilepsy, but then a side effect was noticed that they kind of lost weight, and so then that becomes a weight loss diet. So there are diets that obviously have a place in a medical sense, and I'm not a registered dietitian, so I don't know, like tomorrow if someone came to me with a kidney problem, I wouldn't know what to do, so I would refer them to a registered dietitian, right? So obviously diets have their place for certain medical conditions, and whatever those may be. But today we have come to associate so many diets, and every diet is advocated for weight loss. So it's almost like health has gotten associated with weight loss, and we've forgotten then really to, again, like I said, reconnect to, does this work for me? And you mentioned, what is my intention of going on this diet? Right. And so it's really, really important to understand what is my intention of eating, what is my intention for losing weight, if that's my goal, what is my intention, right? So if I'm just going to follow something just because the news says that's it, then I'm going to be like a headless chicken. I don't even know why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So really reconnecting to not just our body wisdom, but what is our intention of eating. And that's another thing in mindful eating is, the three most important things is, you want to be eating, one, with awareness. So, why am I eating? Am I hungry, etc. Two is intention. So, my intention is to nourish myself. My intention is to eat to feel supported and energized and alive. And that can be, sometimes I can eat an orange to feel that, and sometimes I can eat a chocolate as well. It's not about judging food as good or bad. So there's no food as good or bad. It's just reconnecting to what I need, how much I need, in a way that will make me feel better after. So sometimes a chocolate is going to make me feel better after, because I give myself full permission to sit down, eat it, enjoy it, and then forget about it and get on with my life. And then the third thing is obviously eating with attention. So intention is a very big one. So, going on any diet, you really need to be clear on what is my intention and is this really suitable for me
Hmm.
in the long run.
True. Absolutely. Since we also do a lot of work in mental health, and we have a helpline, and we have so much of anxiety, stress, depression, are there any specific foods that you think that are related that will help uplift the mood, or are there certain foods associated with these mental health issues that people are having, that maybe eating a certain type of food will, because it's a lot on chemical imbalances as well, and a lot of these
Yeah.
foods serve the purpose of balancing those imbalances. So what would you say that, what kind of foods are really important for us to keep our brain sharp, to keep all stress, anxiety, uh, depression at bay? What foods are good for that?
So this is a two-part question. So number one, in terms of the actual food that we can want to kind of eat more of and less of to keep our general health, whether that's our mental health or physical health, balance would be obviously as less processed food as possible. Something that is actually a real food rather than that's been manufactured in a factory, right? So the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, things like that. So, but those are just the basics of nutrition, right? So it's not like you tomorrow someone has said walnuts are good, then I'll be eating 50,000 walnuts, then that's also not going to make me feel good, right? So it's everything in balance, as the Buddha said. But in terms of the foods, definitely we want to make sure that we're getting enough vitamins, minerals, and the brightly colored fresh fruits and vegetables that nature has provided for us. But there is also another food that we need to really be aware of, is what else am I feeding into my system? The news that I read, the social media accounts that I'm following, the amount of time I'm spending on screens and on images and information that is really bringing me down. So that is going to influence my mental health a lot. So this concept of detox is not just food related. It's we need to detox ourselves regularly and frequently from the media. We need to detox from toxic situations that we may be in, whether that's relationships or people that are bringing us down, work situations, etc. So food is a very, especially I like to think of it as a very broad concept. It's not just what is going in through my mouth, but it's also what is going in through my other senses.
True, absolutely. We look at food and we think of always overweight, but also there are food related so many disorders which are also now in our country also becoming such a huge challenge for parents, even not eating, bulimia. So there are all these kinds, again, as you said, they're associated with media, they're associated with a certain image that we have of ourselves. But again, food disorders is also growing. So how can we help address that? I mean, how do you help
I
address?
think, yeah, so food disorders are definitely growing, eating disorders are definitely growing, partly also because of this larger kind of connection between finding the perfect diet and happiness, right? Or finding the perfect diet, weight loss, and then happiness. So the images that are projected is that if I lose weight, I will be happy. If I lose weight, if I am thin, if I adhere to this certain kind of beauty standard, then life will suddenly sort itself out. And that does not happen. I have counseled many women and men to tell them that, listen, thin people still have emotions, thin people still struggle, thin people still get heartbreak, thin people still feel frustrated and lonely. And thinness is not, today we've associated with thinness and weight loss with happiness. Ultimately what do we all want is we want to feel happy, and so we're chasing something we think is going to make us feel happy, but it's not. And that is causing a lot of frustration, and that lack of finding meaning and purpose in our life, or that lack of having something to just tell us that we're good enough, right? That is the crux of it all. So the disorders, eating disorders, are actually not about food. They're not even about body image. They're about self-image. They're about feeling unworthy or unlovable and unacceptable. And that's where the bulk of the work needs to be uh, addressed. So if someone comes with an eating disorder and you start telling them, well, you need to be eating this, that's going to scare them, because it's actually, food has become the preoccupation to distract themselves from something deeper that's going on. So, and the deeper issue is really, as a society, we are constantly telling ourselves that we are not good enough, that we need something more, whether that's more money or more clothes or more shoes or more beauty, to be acceptable. And that is the crux of the issue.
Tara, you're also a wellness coach, a weight counselor, an obesity counselor. What do you see that's really happening now in today's world? How do you really look at counseling in terms of weight, nutrition, and using psychotherapy as well as counseling? How do these two different professions, how does it marry to each other, and how do you use that to really help your clients? I mean, what are the issues that you feel are most of the people around you when clients approach? What is it that you think is really standing out today that everyone should be able to keep their eyes open for, that this is what is really growing and one needs to understand those issues at various levels to be able to help address them?
So yeah, I mean, I truly believe that a lot of, especially because I work with a range of people. So some people come just because they want to get more mindful. They may just have a few unhealthy eating habits that we need to address. Like I said, in terms of, just eating in one place of the house, just getting connected with my body, am I hungry, etc. So there's no deep-rooted emotional problem there. But many people that I do work with are either eating or not eating because they're trying to soothe themselves, distract themselves, or numb themselves from their emotions. So, emotional regulation, learning to really learn the tools and strategies to manage and regulate our emotions is really, really key. So I always tell them, we need to lose the mental weight first before the physical weight can follow. The weight you carry in your head is much more than the weight on your body. And so what is the mental weight that we need to lose? So that's where the psychotherapy comes in. That's where, am I struggling with something like grief? Am I struggling with something like forgiveness? Or then there's, all of us at some level could benefit from going to a therapist, right? A qualified therapist, obviously, because we want to learn to understand ourselves better and treat ourselves better and find more nourishing and supportive ways to cultivate a relationship with ourselves. And these are not things we are taught as kids. We are not taught to cultivate a relationship with ourselves. We are taught to be good to others. We are taught to not behave badly. We are taught to give to others. But we're never really taught to also understand ourselves and give back to ourselves. And today, the world that we live in and the pressures that we are put under is kind of taking us away from that peaceful relationship with ourselves, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to someone else. We're constantly comparing to ourselves to the fact that we don't look like that, we are not at that level of success, we don't have that much money. So it's all this feeling of not feeling good enough. And so that's where the psychotherapy comes in, because then we use food or abuse food either to soothe that feeling of not feeling good enough, or then reject food in order to chase that feeling of feeling good enough. So, that's where the psychotherapy bit comes in or helping people to lose the mental weight first.
It's a very interesting concept. Lose the mental weight first. Let's go into the question section, Tara. We have a lot of questions that are coming in. Mrinali is asking, which are the books that you could suggest that they could read on this topic?
So a great book that I really advocate is called Self-Compassion by Dr. Christine Neff. She's a founder of, world's leading researcher in self-compassion. So, working with developing a self-compassion practice would be great here. Another book on mindful eating would be two books, actually. One is Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat by Dr. Michelle May, MD. And the other one is Mindful Eating by Jan Chosen Bays. So she is a kind of pediatrician, but she also works with people, binge eaters, and people who've had bariatric surgery who've regained the weight because they haven't really lost the mental weight. So those are three really, really great books to begin.
And just for everyone to know, we will write all of the names of all of these books as Tara has suggested on our, Instagram page, so you can check in and you can read all of this there. Sonia has a question for you. Does the traditional food brought to us by our ancestors and our elders has any effects on our diet and cognitive? I don't know whether that means cognitive ability. I mean, what basically our traditional foods, what effects it has on our mind and our body?
So I think that varies. It's kind of broad question, So traditional foods were also developed at a certain time of certain physical activity, right? So, people, especially societies where there was a lot more manual labor, etc., traditional foods would be more carb based, would be more, eating. I don't know. It would also depend on the location. So in the south there would be more rice, in the north there would be more wheat. So traditional foods definitely have their place, but again, we are not also then in that same level of traditional activity. So we want to kind of be flowing and moving with our time. So having a sort of, again, I can only think of balance. Traditional foods have their place and purpose, but we also need to understand that we're not working in that same way. We are a lot less active than that before. So we just don't want to blindly follow traditional diets because that they may not be working for us in this current moment.
Absolutely, like being in Punjab, and if you're a farmer and eating aloo ka paratha with that much of butter,
because you're working in the field all day, you need that.
Absolutely. Another participant is asking, Sakshi, that the food that we eat, how does it affect our physiological behavior?
What do you physiological behavior?
Physiological behavior. Does food that we eat affect our physiological behavior?
So obviously it does. I mean, whatever food that we eat is being used by the body to nourish all the different organs. So obviously, again, whether eating food as real food, whether that's coming from real foods like whole grains, vegetables, fruits, salads, that's going to have obviously a positive physiological effect. Our body is going to be able to, perform its functions better, our heart's going to function better, kidney, etc. But if I'm eating foods that are manufactured in a factory, I'm not going to be able to have that kind of balance and health in general.
Shreya is asking you, how can we overcome junk food cravings?
So this is a big one. It's a good question. We also first want to understand that what are we really craving? So cravings for food are usually not coming from a physical need for food. They're coming from an emotional need. So really, what else? Connecting to what else am I craving? Am I craving love, connection, reward, entertainment, peace? And really, really first connecting with what is the emotional craving behind the physical craving. That becomes the first step to working with that.
Shambhavi wants to know that she's come across many child obesity cases. So, how can you suggest any help or any books that are related to this topic? How do you help someone whose child is obese children?
So it's a difficult one because there's a lot of conditioning going on, and also parents today are very much in denial that they have a problem. They are, it's like my child has a problem, but the family system does not have a problem. So it's a difficult situation. It is a situation that will require a family change in the lifestyle, because you cannot be having the child eating separate food from what the family is eating, or the habits that the family is engaging in. So it's really a matter of um, working in a family therapy setting, really. So it's tough because many parents are not open to this, also, especially if they're living in a joint family system. The grandparents are not about to change their lifestyle. So it's really about understanding that there's a whole dynamic besides what that child is eating.
Healthier, but with so much of environment harm, our soil also is polluted. We use so much of pesticides and fertilizers, which are also very harmful. So, are organic foods really organic? Should we really be spending that extra to go for organic?
Well, technically in India, organic foods are not organic because depending on what standard you follow. So the European standards, I think you have to have the soil that is like has been fed with organic water for 5 years, and I don't think in India there is, or there must be very, very few places like that. So typically most foods would not be classified by the European standards as organic. But that said, in my own opinion, I do feel that as little pesticided food as we can get is as much as we can do. So there's only so much we can control, there's only so much we can do. But yes, to get that little extra if we can afford it. If we can't afford it, then obviously then we don't want to be so sort of consumed by the fact that we want to buy organic food that we're breaking our bank balance. But if we can afford it, then and it's available, then why not? It's as little chemicals as possible is better. I mean, that's my opinion. women it may be acne, for some women it may be no periods, for someone it may be no symptoms, just the ovaries having, cysts, etc. So, but again, working with PCOS, we want to really help the client understand themselves from a holistic perspective. So are they eating, are they engaging in nourishing and supportive eating and lifestyle behaviors for themselves? So whether that's also, because PCOS has a lot to do with stress, and if I what am I doing to really regulate my stress, to manage my stress and work through my stress? So it's not, I could be extremely stressed, but eating really, really clean and I still have PCOS, right? So we really want to be working as a system.
Absolutely. Gia Pandey wants to know if you have a patient or a client that doesn't follow a certain diet, but as a therapist, as a counselor, that it is good for them, then what do you do in such a case?
None of my clients follow any diet. The diet that I follow is when you're not distracted, are you eating in the bedroom, all of those kind of things. So yeah, no one is on a diet. I don't like the word diet because it implies everything that you cannot eat, whereas the real focus wants to be on what do I need to include to feel good.
Right. There was something about I'm just sorting out things which you have not spoken about before.
So
But something about a feedism theory is what's
what? Sorry?
someone. Um, Lost it. Feederism. Sakshi, you'll have to just would you tell us something about feederism or
I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
Varsha is asking you what it means when we keep an upvas or when we are fasting. What does it do to our health? What does fasting mean for us?
So again, I think this goes back to the intention as to what is the intention of keeping the upvas. So traditionally in all cultures and spiritual practices, the idea of a fast is inbuilt, but the fast is really a fast from outside stimulation. It's food is symbolic of that, to keep the system kind of clear from and my sense is clear from outside noise, outside stimulation, so that I can go deep within and connect to my inner wisdom within. So the upvas, from that sense, in when it is undertaken in with that intention, to really, really connect to my spiritual self, I think it has a great effect. I think it really helps us connect to our own voice, our own wisdom, our own spirituality. But an upvas that is taken, first of all, just because it's taken, and then with the hope that, oh, maybe in this I will lose weight, I don't think that has any positive effect. I think that it probably has a negative effect because you regain back all that weight. So the intention becomes really, really important behind the upvas.
Sure. Sayali would like to know whether are any of our eating habits are they related to hereditary? Are eating habits hereditary?
Habits in general are not hereditary, but habits are learned. So again, it's difficult to separate the two because we grow up in the same environment in which usually, typically, that that give us the same genes. So, but habits. But that said, if you don't grow up in the environment with your biological parents, and you grow up in a different environment, those habits are more likely to stick. So habits are more environmental and conditioning.
What are the certain myths that people have regarding food and eating habits that really need to be addressed today?
So I think the number one myth would be that in terms of food and nutrition, this carbs thing, this, this being afraid of carbs or being afraid of sugar. So, okay, so and this myth that I need to eat clean, or I need to, as if, food is dirty, or there's some good foods and bad foods. And, when we bring all these judgments and we judge food as good or bad, what it is doing, then it's actually increasing cravings for the bad food, because the mind works as such that the minute you tell the mind it can't have something, that's all it's going to want. So I think the myth is to kind of just demonize food in general, and just start to eat food as food rather than carbs or protein or fat or sugar or grams of this and grams of that. So I think that's one myth. And I think another myth that really needs to be busted is that there is this perfect formula when it comes to food. There is no perfect formula when it comes to food, because there's no perfect formula for anything when it comes to life. And so I think that really needs to be busted.
True, absolutely. Tara, since we have certain number of students and who will be taking up food nutrition or become dietitians as professions, what is it that you really would like to tell them? What should they be careful about as they as this may become their future profession? What can you tell them today that what they should be able to do in their field, in terms of also with everything that you have spoken, in terms of all the self-compassion therapy that you spoke about? So what is it that everyone should know? It might not be taught in their course, but
Yeah.
something that you as a practitioner that you've seen over the years with your all the all your patients or your clients that you've been with, that people that many dietitians are not careful about or are not practicing certain things, but which are very, very important for them to know in order to help all these food myths that are there today, so they also become transmitters of the right knowledge and the right information to all the
Yeah.
people around them.
So
So just what
a few things that I would like to kind of tell future nutritionists is, one, develop your own mindful eating practice, right? So you cannot preach what you don't practice yourself. So start getting to know your own, then cultivate your own relationship with your body, and develop that mindfulness in terms of your eating as well as in terms of your living. That becomes really, really important. Number two would be also develop a self-compassion practice for yourself. Like learn to understand your own emotional triggers when it comes to eating and emotions, and how would you like to work with that. Maybe seek even help to do that, because I'll give an example. As therapists, we cannot be a therapist if we don't undergo therapy ourselves. So as a nutritionist, you may want to also reach out for help to, if you are struggling with food, because I also know that many nutritionists go into the field because they are themselves struggling with the issue. So it's okay to reach for help. It's okay to recognize that we don't always have to be perfect before we can give advice. Like we can heal along the way that we heal our clients. Number three, I think, would be, in terms of just the advice that you want to give clients, is like, move away from you need to lose weight, you need to not eat this, you need to not eat that. And really, when we talk to a client, we really want to be as supportive as possible. So and asking them what some of the things that might be nourishing and supporting to you, because ultimately the best expert on a person is the person themselves. So letting go of our expert hat and kind of co-working with our clients and patients becomes really, really important. And the way we present our information becomes really important. So instead of saying you need to lose weight, so kind of saying, what would feel more nourishing and supportive for you? What foods would feel more nourishing and supportive? Or instead of saying you need to cut out this, you want to focus on, these are the foods we need to include. These are the foods we need to increase. So things like that become really important. But really working on ourselves first and understanding ourselves becomes so key.
absolutely. I think before we end, let's all click a group picture together, Tara, with you. So can everyone just switch on their videos if it's possible, so we can all click this one picture with her. And I hope this was interesting, for you all. I learned so much from you, Tara, today.
Thank
And,
you.
really mindfulness practice, not eating at your desk. I think this is something that all of us unknowingly, do that. And it's a great way of really integrating what you said. It's not just about food, but your entire wellness, your approach to your entire holistic health, rather than looking at food as a separate component. And that was what was the most interesting part, that you haven't put it in a separate bucket, but you are looking at it as through a lens of complete holistic wellness, where you're working on yourself inside out. And that's when really real transformation and actual results one will be able to see. Priyal, can you click a picture?
Yes,
well?
I'm clicking. If everybody can switch on their videos, I can see some of them haven't. So, everybody. So, like, there are like 3-4 pages. So, we will start with one page, okay? Everybody say cheese, smile. Yeah.
So I hope all of you also enjoyed that. We will be, putting up the entire recording of this webinar on our Instagram page. And we'll also, Tara, if it's okay, I can, if I can share your email, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, or,
Sure.
have further questions with you. So we'll also share Tara's email as well, and all the books that she has recommended. So you can all also, get in touch with her, if you all, want her to counsel you, or as students, or as, people who need help, or, maybe recommend, someone that who you think needs this help. So all of this will be available from tomorrow on our Instagram page. Have you clicked, Priyal?
Yes, I have clicked. I have clicked all the pictures, and also I want to request all the students. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, participant level was full, so the recording will be sent to everybody on their email. It will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So please spread the word among your friends. Okay.
And thank you so much, all of you, for coming in here. I hope you all benefited as much as we all did. Thank you so much, Tara, for being here.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Excellent, conversation with you. We all of us learned so much. Thank you for giving your time. And I hope we'll catch up with you and have another conversation with you very soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you all. Thank you all, students, for coming. All the girls. Participants, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving your time this Saturday. And I hope you all stay connected with us on our mental health website. We do come up with a lot of webinars every weekend. And I hope you can write into us to tell us what more you would like to know, what more you would like to, which other personality you would like to meet, interact with. And do stay in touch. And thank you all very much for coming. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Have a wonderful weekend.